Brendon is already joining us or has joined us already on Zoom. So what we are going to be speaking about, like we mentioned before going to Salah, is that we will be speaking about, Apple's highly anticipated Worldwide Developers Conference. And now Brendon will be breaking down the must-know details about the latest advancement, announcements, and innovation in Apple's world-renowned devices, software, and services. Whether you are a developer, a designer, or just, someone who is an avid tech enthusiast, you would not want to miss this opportunity to stay ahead of the curve in the ever-evolving world of technology. Now, thank you so much for joining us, Brendon, and welcome to Prime Live.
Always great to chat to you.
Thank you so much. Now, can you please tell us about the WWDC and what is it all about? How long does it go on for?
So, as you said, WWDC is Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference. Some people call it WWDC. It is Apple's biggest annual event for software innovation, and this is the sort of time when they unveil the future of all their platforms. So iOS, macOS, watchOS, all of those sort of things. It is, as you said, mostly aimed at developers and tech creators, but it does also give, those of us who are consumers who use the actual Apple products, a sneak peek into sort of what's coming next for, the iPads, the iPhones, Macs, and Apple's entire ecosystem. So the conference normally runs for about a week. This year it began on Monday.
And in terms of the key themes and highlights, what can we expect on this year's WWDC?
I think before WWDC's keynote kicked off, everyone was expecting them to touch on Apple Intelligence because that was such a big thing for them last year.
Yes.
Obviously, Apple, in typical Apple fashion, is never going to call it artificial intelligence. But, we've seen that with the big promises made last year, they unfortunately were not able to deliver. And this year's one was a little bit more muted on the AI front, more sort of about the other features, the other things that they're doing. So a lot of it was focused on sort of the renaming of all the operating systems. For example, if you have an iPhone right now, if you have one of the devices that supported, you would be on iOS 18. One would assume the next one would be iOS 19. Actually, no, everything is now going to 26. So iOS 26 will be the name of the next operating system. iPad OS 26, Mac OS 26, also known as Mac OS Tahoe. So everything is getting the name to that. They've got a new sort of liquid glass is what they call it, design interface. So there's more about those things, and it felt a lot like they were catching up to a lot of the features that a lot of other OEMs already have on their devices.
And just to touch more on the, on the conference itself, are there any new devices or features that you can predict, or is there anything that Apple has revealed on their side, anything new?
No, it's not a big platform for device launches. However, they have in the past, unveiled things like MacBooks, obviously the chipset that runs all the Macs now, the M series chips, which have turned that entire world on its head. But this year really was just a pure focus on software. In terms of, some of the things that were announced, I don't know if I'd call them game changers, but I think one of the big things for anyone who uses an iPad is with the sort of updates that have been announced, it now feels like the iPad is more like a laptop or computer than ever before in the history of iPad. So I think, that's going to have a massive impact because for a long time across the board, we've seen tablets positioned as, the next computer. And they've never quite delivered. And I think with now Apple making this big move, I think it's going to prompt all of the other companies, the Samsungs, the Honors, everybody else who makes tablets, Google, to push what they're doing and actually now, keep pace with that.
And how might these innovations change the game in terms of consumer expectations and market trends?
Apple's always been the industry leader. As much as people like to criticize them for, being behind the times and playing catch up, people say that, and then the next device you see brings a lot of, features or design elements that Apple first debuted. So I think that is going to continue to be the case. I think the big sort of innovation that is going to be a game changer really is, even though they didn't speak about AI or Apple Intelligence, when they did mention it, they kept stressing security and on-device security. And that to me is the biggest game changer, because a lot of these companies, when they talk about, ChatGPT or Claude or from Anthropic or any of these other things, it's all in the cloud, and they can't guarantee, safety and privacy. If you look at Apple, obviously trust, privacy is not just, something they like to type. It's a key part of the identity, and they are essentially positioning themselves as the company to keep your data safe and secure even when you are using these models. I think that is going to be a massive game changer. And, over the last how many weeks, almost months, I think we've been speaking on and off about, data privacy, data security, and I think very, very uncertain future with AI.
I mean, thank you so much for mentioning that. We do know that there are a lot of tech giants in the market who are also competing for the market share. Do you think that Apple will be able to, maintain its leadership in the industry in the upcoming years?
I think it's a very interesting question, because, I just had this conversation with someone just the other day where, companies like Apple, Samsung have been at the forefront for such a long time, especially Apple. But we're seeing a massive onslaught from, especially the Chinese OEMs, the Honors, the Oppos, the Xiaomis, the Vivos, and the Huaweis. So I think Apple's got a lot more now in terms of competition than they ever had before. And I think they are not necessarily wrong to take the slow and steady approach, but I think they also need to know when that needs to change up. So I think they will continue to gain it, sort of keep the market share, gain more market share. If you look at reports from Counterpoint Data Research, Apple's market share in terms of the iPhone continue to grow year on year in industries and segments where they've never, dominated, and they now are the number one selling phone in the world. That's never actually been a thing that they've been able to sort of tout, this early on in the year. So I think definitely yes, but I think they also need to be very aware of the competition that they're facing.
No, most definitely. And in terms of back to the WWDC, what do you think are the long-term implications of this year's WWDC for both the tech industry and for everyday consumers?
I think, it may sound a little bit, I don't know, almost ignorant to say this, but I think that their full belief in what they're doing as a company in terms of, we want to help consumers and we want to keep your data private and safe. I think that is going to be the biggest thing that is going to force other companies to rethink how they roll out AI. Not just the features, but in terms of how we're able to access it and, how it does what it does. I think that what this means for us as consumers is that the next generation of devices, as we can already see, is not just about hardware specs, but I think we're now going to be paying even closer attention to how smart, how safe, and how helpful they are. And that safe part is the key aspect of this.
And I think that's the safety and the data security that Apple obviously provides is what set them apart. And like you said, it's going to force other companies to level up so that they can also deliver, the same expectations to the consumers. Now, as we wrap up our chat about the WWDC, what advice would you give to the developers, designers, other tech enthusiasts who want to stay ahead of the curve and leverage the latest advancements and trends from this year's conference?
I think there's a few different things. I think one, developers, designers, anyone who's working with these things, one, you need to start experimenting now. Companies like Apple and so many others, they offer developer tools, SDKs, APIs. At the keynote, they also announced they're giving developers access to their foundation model so they can bake AI, into the apps and their features. So I think, definitely go and play around with those. It's easy to find as a developer. You're getting a lot of access from Apple. And I think also keep in mind that the future really is going to be personalized experiences. And, with Apple's ecosystem, I think there's such potential for people to bring features and things that we've never thought of before. Craig Federighi, one of the senior executives at Apple, sort of almost described AI as the internet. When the internet started, we would never have thought of things like YouTube and all these other things, and all these other things that have come out of it. So for people saying, oh, but Apple, you're not doing this, that, and that, you don't see people saying, Apple, why don't you have a YouTube? But now you things that have never existed before, on what is arguably the largest ecosystem on the planet. So I think that really is the thing. Go find those APKs, those APIs, those SDKs, those developer tools. You can find them, on Apple's websites, and play around with these things. Because I think, with Apple Intelligence, with what they're trying to do, and keeping privacy at the forefront, I think there still is a lot of untapped potential. And I think, especially from Africa, I think we need to continue to show the world what we're capable of.
Most definitely. And before we let you go, Brendon, in terms of the event itself or the conference itself, for those who obviously missed it this year without having knowledge of the conference, where does it take place? How does one get to be part of the conference so that they can benefit?
So the conference is normally held at Apple's campus, Apple Park in Cupertino in California. If you are a member of the media or content creator, they might reach out and invite you. Certain developers also get invited by Apple. Otherwise, you've got to pay your own way. Alternatively, you can actually just go to the website, developer.apple.com, and you'll actually be able to catch up with a lot of, the labs and all of these things. You'll obviously have to register, create an account as a developer. But once you do that, you can actually just jump online. You can attend a lot of the things. You can see the keynote. You can watch the platform State of the Union. You can get access to the sessions, the documentation, the guides, the sample code, all of those things, and you can actually start working on these things that you want to get. And obviously all that costs you is your time and the cost of your internet.
I mean, Brendon, thank you so much for joining us and for shedding some light on the WWDC conference and in terms of what we can expect from them and Apple as a whole.
Thank you always for having me.
Thank you so much. Viewers at home, this was a very interesting conversation that I just had with Brendon Petersen regarding the WWDC, and just Apple's development in terms of their innovations and where they headed to, in terms of data security, what keeps them ahead of the game, what makes them different, and I hope you really, really enjoyed the conversation. But without wasting any time, let's go to a quick ad break. We'll see you right after this.